No one in Marlo Quinn's apartment building on the east side of Portland heard the scream clearly. It was past midnight, rain tapping lightly against the windows, the city half asleep beneath a low blanket of clouds. But inside Unit 3B, Marlo woke up violently, her body arching off the mattress as if seized by an invisible hand. Her mouth opened wide, yet the sound that escaped was broken, strangled, more like the gasp of someone drowning than a cry for help. Cold sweat soaked her sheets, clinging to her skin, while her heart hammered so hard it felt ready to tear through her ribs. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Her limbs trembled uncontrollably, fingers curling inward as if they no longer belonged to her. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, pressing against her lungs. When she finally dragged in a breath, it burned. Her chest ached sharply, and a deep, unfamiliar fear settled in her stomach, instinctive and overwhelming, as if her body knew something her mind could not yet understand. Marlo was 20 years old. Until a few weeks earlier, her life had been painfully ordinary. She was a literature major at a local university, juggling part-time work at a bookstore and late-night study sessions fueled by coffee and deadlines. She lived alone in a small but tidy apartment, decorated with thrift store furniture, stacked novels, and photos pinned to a corkboard above her desk. Her dreams were modest. Finish school. Write something meaningful one day. Maybe leave Oregon, maybe not. Nothing about her life suggested danger, mystery, or horror. She sat up slowly, waiting for the room to stop spinning. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 12:47 a.m. Her bedside lamp flicked on with a soft click, flooding the room with warm light. Everything looked normal. The gray walls. The folded hoodie on the chair. The closed bedroom door. And yet, something felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. Not like fear after a bad dream. This felt deeper, rooted somewhere beneath thought. Her body still burned with heat. She pressed a hand to her forehead and recoiled slightly. Fever. Again. It had been happening on and off for days now. At first she had brushed it off as stress or a seasonal flu. Portland winters were notorious for that. But this felt different. The fever came in waves, sudden and crushing, leaving her weak and disoriented. Tonight, it was worse than ever. Marlo swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, immediately regretting it. The room tilted sharply. She grabbed the edge of the dresser to keep from falling. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Pale skin. Dark circles under her eyes. Her lips looked faintly bluish, as if she hadn't slept in days. She barely recognized herself. She stumbled into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. The shock helped a little. As she leaned over the sink, breathing slowly, a sharp pain stabbed through her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She gasped and clutched the porcelain edge, heart racing. For a terrifying second, she thought she might collapse right there on the tile floor. When the pain faded, she straightened up and stared at herself again. Her eyes looked darker somehow. Not literally, she told herself. Just exhaustion. Just fear. Back in her bedroom, she wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the edge of the bed. She tried to think logically. She needed a doctor. She'd already missed 2 classes that week. Her phone lay on the nightstand, unread messages lighting up the screen. One name stood out. Rowan Harley. Rowan was her closest friend. They had met freshman year and bonded instantly over obscure novels and shared sarcasm. Rowan was different from Marlo in almost every way. Where Marlo was cautious and grounded, Rowan was curious to a fault. She believed in things Marlo had always dismissed. Energy. Signs. Things unseen. Normally, Marlo found it amusing. Lately, she found herself clinging to Rowan's calm voice more than she wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her flinch. Another wave of fear washed over her, irrational and intense. She exhaled shakily and picked it up. A text from Rowan, sent hours earlier. "You okay? You didn't answer earlier." Marlowe stared at the screen, fingers hovering. She typed slowly, trying to keep the message steady. "I'm sick again. Worse tonight." The reply came almost instantly. "I'm coming over tomorrow. This doesn't feel normal." Marlowe set the phone down and leaned back, closing her eyes. She told herself it was just an illness. Something temporary. Something that would pass. But deep down, beneath the fever and the fear, a quiet thought took shape, one she refused to say out loud. Whatever was happening to her had already started. And it wasn't done yet. Morning came slowly, as if the city itself hesitated to wake her. Grey light seeped through the thin curtains of Marlowe Quinn's apartment, casting dull shapes across the walls. She had not truly slept. Instead, she drifted in and out of shallow half-dreams, each one tangled with fragments of sound and pressure, as if something unseen lingered just beyond her awareness. When her eyes finally opened fully, her body felt hollowed out, weak in a way she had never experienced before. The fever was gone. Completely. Her skin felt cool, almost unnaturally so. For a moment, relief washed over her. She sat up slowly, waiting for the familiar dizziness, but it never came. Her limbs moved easily. Her chest no longer burned. The crushing weight that had gripped her during the night was simply absent. She frowned, confused. Marlowe stood and walked to the bathroom without support. She splashed water on her face, studying her reflection carefully. The dark circles were still there, but her color had returned. Her breathing was steady. Her heart calm. If she hadn't lived through the night before, she might have believed she'd imagined it all. By noon, Rowan arrived. Rowan Hale never knocked softly. The rapid tapping on the door broke the silence, sharp and urgent. When Marlowe opened it, Rowan froze, eyes scanning her face with careful intensity. "You look better," Rowan said slowly. "Too much better." They sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising from 2 mugs of coffee. Marlowe explained everything. The fevers. The chest pain. The scream she barely remembered. Rowan listened without interrupting, fingers wrapped tightly around her mug, eyes never leaving Marlowe's face. "This isn't just stress," Rowan finally said. "I know you don't like hearing this, but this feels wrong. Like something is stuck." Marlowe forced a weak smile. "Stuck where?" "On you," Rowan said quietly. "Or in you." Normally, Marlowe would have laughed. She would have changed the subject, teased Rowan about reading too many strange books. But today, the words settled heavily in her chest. She didn't argue. Rowan hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was cracked leather, the pages yellowed and uneven. "I found this a while back," Rowan said. "Used bookstore downtown. I didn't think I'd ever show it to you." Marlowe felt a sudden chill crawl up her spine. "Rowan." "Just listen," Rowan said quickly. "There are things in here about sudden illness. Energy imbalance. Old methods people used before modern medicine. I know it sounds insane, but you got better overnight. That doesn't happen." They talked for hours. Rowan spoke carefully, choosing words that felt almost reasonable. Not demons. Not possession. Just forces. Exchanges. Balance. Marlowe told herself she was only listening out of curiosity. Out of desperation. Anything to explain what logic could not. That night, the fever returned. It came without warning. One moment Marlowe was lying on her couch, scrolling through her phone. The next her vision blurred and heat flooded her body like a wave. She curled into herself, teeth chattering violently, skin burning as if pressed against fire. Rowan didn't hesitate. They cleared the living room floor. Candles were placed carefully, evenly spaced. Rowan moved with surprising confidence, her voice steady as she explained what to say, where to stand, when to breathe. Marlowe's thoughts felt distant, muffled by the pounding in her head. She told herself this was harmless, symbolic, psychological. But when Rowan began speaking the words aloud, the air changed. It grew dense, pressurized. Marlowe felt it in her ears, in her chest, like descending underwater. Her heart raced. The candle flames flickered violently, though the windows were closed. Her skin prickled with goosebumps. "Repeat after me," Rowan said softly. Marlowe did. The words tasted wrong in her mouth. Old. Heavy. Each syllable felt like it dragged something loose inside her. Her stomach twisted painfully. The pressure built until she thought she might pass out. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The heat vanished. The pain dissolved. Marlowe collapsed backward onto the floor, gasping, her body trembling as the candles burned steadily once more. "It worked," Rowan whispered, awe creeping into her voice. Marlowe didn't answer. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, breathing slowly. She felt incredible. Strong. Clear. More alive than she had in weeks. That night, she slept deeply. Too deeply. She dreamed of standing alone on a long empty bridge. Water moved far below, dark and endless. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten there, only that she was not alone. Something stood behind her. Close enough that she could feel its presence against her back. It did not touch her. It didn't need to. When she woke, the sun was rising. She was completely healed. And somewhere deep inside her, something else was awake too. For the first few days after the ritual, Marlowe Quinn convinced herself that everything had returned to normal. More than normal, actually. She woke each morning before her alarm with a strange clarity in her head, as if a fog she hadn't known was there had been lifted. Her body felt light. Strong. She moved through her apartment with ease, cleaned without getting tired, focused on reading for hours without losing concentration. The lingering fear from the fevered nights faded into something distant, something she could almost laugh at. She returned to campus for the first time in over a week, walking across wet sidewalks lined with leafless trees, the air cold and sharp in her lungs. The university buildings looked the same as always, gray concrete softened by moss and ivy, students rushing past with headphones in, unaware of how close she had come to something she still couldn't fully explain. Professors welcomed her back with polite concern. Friends commented that she looked rested. Healthy. Rowan noticed something else. "You feel different," Rowan said one afternoon as they sat in the bookstore cafe where Marlowe worked. "Not sick different. Just sharper." Marlowe shrugged it off. "I feel fine. Better than fine." And she did. Almost too fine. The first crack appeared that night. She dreamed she was awake in her apartment, standing in the hallway outside her bedroom. The lights were off, but she could see clearly anyway. The air felt thick, buzzing softly, like electricity just before a storm. At the far end of the hallway, something shifted. A shape without edges. Not darkness exactly, but an absence, like a piece of the world had been erased. She tried to step back, but her body wouldn't move. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside her chest. Calm. Patient. Familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. "You asked." I answered. She woke gasping, heart racing, her sheets twisted tightly around her legs. The room was empty. Silent. Her phone read 3:12 a.m. She sat there for a long time, listening to her own breathing, telling herself it was just a dream. But the dreams kept coming. Each night, they grew more vivid. More intimate. She dreamed of standing in familiar places that felt subtly wrong. The bookstore with shelves that stretched impossibly high. The campus library with no windows, where whispers drifted between the aisles. Her childhood home, empty and hollow, the walls breathing slowly in and out. And always that presence. Never seen clearly. Always close. During the day, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small. Words slipped out of her mouth before she realized she'd spoken. Not insults or threats, just observations that felt invasive. She knew things about people she shouldn't. Private fears. Buried regrets. A classmate flinched when Marlowe casually mentioned his estranged father. A customer at the bookstore went pale when Marlowe commented on a ring she wore, mentioning a divorce she had never spoken of aloud. Lucky guesses, Marlowe told herself. But the reactions stayed with her. Then came the aversion. It happened without warning. Walking past a small church near campus, she felt a sudden wave of nausea so strong she had to stop and bend over, hands on her knees, breathing through it. The sound of the bells made her head throb painfully. Her skin prickled, as if something beneath it were trying to pull away. She crossed the street quickly, heart pounding, the sensation fading as soon as she put distance between herself and the building. That night, she tried to pray. It wasn't something she did often, but the habit was still there, ingrained from childhood. She sat on the edge of her bed, clasped her hands, and closed her eyes. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Heavy. When she forced them out anyway, a sharp pain shot through her chest, stealing her breath. Her eyes flew open. For a split second, she thought she saw something reflected in the mirror across the room. Not her. Something standing just behind her shoulder. When she turned, there was nothing. The change in her behavior became harder to ignore. She snapped at people without meaning to. Laughed at the wrong moments. Once, during a study group, a heated anger rose in her so suddenly that she slammed her notebook shut and stormed out, hands shaking, pulse roaring in her ears. The emotion faded just as quickly, leaving behind confusion and a deep, unsettling sense that the reaction hadn't been entirely hers. Rowan confronted her a week later. "You're scaring me," Rowan said quietly, sitting across from her in the apartment. "This was supposed to help. But you're not acting like yourself." Marlowe opened her mouth to respond and froze. For a brief, terrifying moment, she couldn't remember what she had planned to say. Her thoughts felt scrambled, rearranged by something else. She swallowed hard. "I'm just tired," she said finally. "That's all." But even as she spoke, a pressure settled low in her abdomen, a familiar sensation now. Not pain. Not illness. Something closer to anticipation. That night, the dream changed. She stood in the same empty hallway, but this time she could move. At the far end, the shape waited. As she stepped closer, she understood without being told that it was not trapped with her. She was trapped with it. "You're stronger now," the voice said gently. "Because of me." She tried to scream, but no sound came out. When she woke, her throat was raw, her pillow damp with sweat. And etched into her mind was a certainty she could no longer deny. Whatever had answered the ritual was no longer waiting. It was settling in. By the time the second week passed, Marlowe Quinn could no longer pretend that what was happening to her was temporary. The sense of control she had enjoyed after the ritual began slipping through her fingers in quiet, terrifying ways. Nothing dramatic at first. No sudden collapse. No screaming fits in public. Instead, it was the subtle erosion of choice, the feeling that her thoughts were no longer entirely private. She began losing time. It started with minutes. She would glance at her phone, then look up to find half an hour gone, her body standing somewhere she didn't remember walking to. Once, she found herself outside the bookstore after closing hours, keys in hand, the metal door already locked, with no memory of finishing her shift. Another time, she discovered her laptop open on the kitchen table, a blank document filled with lines of text she didn't remember typing. The words themselves made her stomach turn. They were structured, deliberate, written in a calm tone that did not sound like her own. She deleted the file immediately, hands shaking, heart racing, but the unease stayed with her long after. Her body began reacting before her mind could catch up. Sounds felt sharper, more invasive. Sirens slicing through the city made her flinch violently. Sudden laughter nearby sent irritation spiking through her chest like static. She found herself staring too long at people's faces, noticing tiny movements, micro-expressions, the way fear or guilt flickered behind someone's eyes. It felt intrusive, like she was seeing something she wasn't meant to. Sleep became dangerous. The dreams no longer waited for night. They bled into the edges of her waking hours. Shadows lingered too long in corners. Reflections in windows felt delayed, as if they didn't quite match her movements. Once, while brushing her teeth, she caught her reflection smiling when she wasn't. That was the first time she felt genuine panic. She backed away from the mirror, heart pounding, breath shallow. The smile faded slowly, reluctantly, as if released by an unseen hand. Marlowe pressed her palms against the cool bathroom wall and whispered her own name, grounding herself in the sound of it. When she finally dared to look again, everything appeared normal. Too normal. She stopped going near churches entirely. Even passing one triggered nausea and a sharp buzzing sensation behind her eyes. The sound of bells made her skin crawl. Religious imagery on billboards or necklaces caused a strange tightening in her throat, like an allergic reaction. She tried once to walk into a campus chapel out of stubborn defiance, telling herself fear had no power if she refused it. She barely made it past the doorway. Her vision blurred, the floor seemed to tilt, and a sudden, overwhelming pressure crushed her chest. Her legs gave out, and she caught herself against the wall, gasping, heart hammering violently. Students nearby stared in alarm as she staggered backward into the open air. The moment she crossed the threshold, the pressure released, leaving her weak and shaking. She didn't try again. Rowan grew increasingly frantic. "You're not okay," Rowan said one night, pacing Marlowe's living room. "This isn't what I meant. I swear to you, this isn't what was supposed to happen." Marlowe sat on the couch, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the darkened television screen. "It helped at first," she said quietly. "You saw that. I was dying, Rowan. Something fixed it." "At what cost?" Rowan snapped, then immediately softened. I didn't think it would stay." The word landed heavily between them. Stay. That night, Marlowe's body betrayed her completely. She woke choking, a violent spasm tearing through her chest. She barely made it to the bathroom before retching. Nothing solid came up. Just thick saliva and a bitter taste that burned her throat. As she leaned over the sink, trembling, something dark slid up her esophagus. It wasn't solid. It wasn't liquid either. It moved. Marlowe screamed as a thin, rope-like shape slipped from her mouth, writhing weakly before collapsing into the sink basin. For one horrifying second, she saw what looked like an eye open and close along its surface. Then it dissolved, melting into black residue that vanished as if it had never existed. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, clutching her throat, lungs burning. Rowan found her like that minutes later, having rushed over after a frantic call she barely remembered making. Rowan stared at the sink, pale and silent, then at Marlowe shaking on the tile. "This isn't sickness," Rowan whispered. "This is possession." The word echoed in Marlowe's skull, heavy and final. Over the next days, things escalated rapidly. Objects moved when she wasn't looking. Not dramatically, but just enough to unsettle her. Books shifted on shelves. Her rosary, a childhood keepsake she hadn't thrown away, tangled itself around her ankle as she walked. Her phone battery drained unnaturally fast whenever she tried to call her parents. Worse than the physical signs was the voice. It no longer waited for dreams. "You're fighting too hard," it murmured one afternoon as she sat alone in her apartment, sunlight slanting through the blinds. The voice came from inside her head, smooth and patient, layered beneath her own thoughts. "Go with it. You invited me." She pressed her hands over her ears, breathing fast. "Get out," she whispered. "You're not real." A soft sensation spread through her chest. Almost affectionate. "You're wrong." The realization hit her with devastating clarity. This thing wasn't forcing its way in. It wasn't attacking her from the outside. It was settling deeper because part of her was letting it. By the end of the week, Marlowe barely recognized herself. Her moods swung violently. Anger flared without warning. Moments of eerie calm followed episodes of terror. She felt hollowed out, like a house someone else had begun rearranging room by room. Her parents noticed immediately when she visited. Her mother pulled her aside, eyes wet with worry. "You don't feel like my daughter," she whispered. "You feel far away." That night, lying in her childhood bed, Marlowe stared at the ceiling and finally admitted the truth she had been avoiding. Whatever she had allowed into her life was no longer content to whisper. It was preparing to take something. And she was running out of time to stop it. The breaking point came quietly, without the drama Marlowe Quinn had once imagined such moments would carry. There was no thunder, no sudden collapse, no cinematic sign that everything had crossed an irreversible line. Instead, it arrived on an ordinary afternoon, wrapped in silence, when she realized she no longer trusted her own intentions. She was sitting alone in her apartment, sunlight leaking through the blinds in thin horizontal stripes, when she noticed her hands trembling in her lap. Not from fear. Not from weakness. From restraint. It felt as if something inside her wanted to move, to act, and she was holding it back with sheer willpower. The effort left her exhausted, her muscles aching as if she had been fighting a physical opponent for hours. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Can you come over tonight? We're worried about you." Marlowe stared at the message for a long time. A sudden irritation flared in her chest, sharp and irrational. Why couldn't they leave her alone? Why did everyone keep pushing? The anger scared her more than the fear ever had. It wasn't hers. She knew that with chilling certainty. "Don't go," the voice murmured softly, emerging beneath her thoughts like a current beneath still water. "They'll interfere." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. "No," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "You don't get to decide that." A sensation spread through her body, slow and deliberate, like fingers tracing along her spine. Not painful. Almost soothing. "I already do," the voice replied calmly. That was the moment Marlowe understood she could no longer handle this alone. She called Rowan. Rowan arrived within minutes, breathless and pale, eyes darting nervously around the apartment as if expecting something to move on its own. Marlowe told her everything. Not just the physical manifestations or the voice, but the most terrifying part of all. The pull. The sense of agreement forming somewhere deep inside her, as if part of her wanted to stop resisting. Rowan sank into the chair across from her, hands shaking. "I never should have brought that book," she whispered. "I didn't think. I thought it was symbolic. I thought it would leave once you were better." "It's not leaving," Marlowe said flatly. "It's waiting." Rowan swallowed hard. "Then we need help. Real help." They tried the hospital again. This time, Marlowe didn't bother softening the truth. She told the emergency physician about the voice, the lost time, the physical manifestations that left no evidence behind. She watched his expression shift carefully from concern to skepticism to something close to discomfort. Tests were ordered. Blood work. Neurological scans. A psychiatric evaluation. Everything came back normal. The psychiatrist spoke gently, using calm, practiced language. Acute psychosis. Stress-induced hallucinations. Dissociation. Trauma response. He suggested inpatient care, medication, observation. As he spoke, Marlowe felt something coil tighter inside her, a deep, instinctive resistance rising like a wall. No cages, the voice said quietly. Her pulse spiked. Her vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt. She stood up suddenly, knocking the chair backward with a loud clatter. The doctor froze. Rowan gasped. "I'm not crazy," Marlowe said, her voice coming out lower than she expected. "Steadier. Something is wrong. And you can't see it." For a brief, horrifying second, she saw fear flicker in the doctor's eyes. They let her leave. Outside, Rowan was shaking. "They can't help us," she said hoarsely. "I thought maybe, but they can't." Marlowe nodded. She had felt it too. The way the voice had recoiled at the idea of confinement. The way it reacted to authority, to structure, to control. That night, her parents came over unannounced. Her father stood stiffly in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes searching her face. Her mother reached for her hands and immediately flinched. "You feel cold," her mother whispered. "Not sick. Just wrong." The word hung in the air. They sat together in the living room, tension thick and suffocating. Marlowe wanted to reassure them, wanted to lie convincingly, but every attempt felt blocked, as if something inside her rejected the idea of comfort. Her father spoke quietly. "We've talked to someone. A priest." The voice reacted instantly. A surge of pressure slammed into Marlowe's chest, stealing her breath. Her fingers dug into the couch cushions as she struggled to stay upright. "No," it hissed, no longer patient. "Not him." Her heart pounded violently. Sweat broke out along her hairline. "I don't need that," Marlowe said automatically, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I'm fine." Rowan's eyes widened. "Marlowe." Her mother began to cry. That night was the worst yet. Marlowe woke screaming, her body arching violently, muscles locking as if seized by electricity. The voice roared inside her head, no longer calm, no longer gentle. Images flooded her mind. Fire. Falling. Hands pulling her under dark water. Her parents rushed in, terrified, her father trying to hold her still while her mother prayed through sobs. Marlowe felt herself slipping, her awareness fragmenting, thoughts scattering like glass. For a terrifying stretch of time, she wasn't sure which thoughts were hers anymore. When it finally passed, she lay limp and exhausted, throat raw, eyes burning with tears. In the silence that followed, one truth became undeniable. The thing inside her was no longer hiding. It was reacting. And whatever help her parents had mentioned had already become its enemy. The decision was no longer Marlowe Quinn's to make, not entirely. She understood that with a terrifying clarity as dawn crept through the windows of her childhood home, pale light spreading across the familiar ceiling she had stared at so many times as a teenager. She lay rigid beneath the blankets, every muscle sore, her throat raw as if she had been screaming for hours. Her parents whispered in the kitchen, their voices low and urgent, carrying the weight of fear they were trying desperately to hide from her. The thing inside her was awake. It did not speak at first. It didn't need to. Its presence pressed against her awareness like a second heartbeat, steady and patient. It had learned. It knew when to push and when to wait. That knowledge frightened her more than its earlier cruelty ever had. When her mother entered the room, holding a mug of tea with trembling hands, Marlowe tried to smile. The expression felt wrong on her face, stretched and artificial, as if her muscles no longer remembered how to arrange themselves naturally. "You need rest," her mother said softly. "We're not going anywhere today." Marlowe nodded, but inside, panic flared. She knew what was coming. By mid-morning, the priest arrived. Father Daniel Cross did not look like the kind of man Marlowe had expected. He wasn't old or severe or dramatic. He wore simple clothes beneath his coat, his movements calm, deliberate. His eyes, however, were sharp in a quiet way, observant without being intrusive. When he stepped into the living room, Marlowe felt the air change instantly. The presence inside her recoiled. A violent pressure slammed into her chest, and she gasped, fingers digging into the armrest of the couch. Her vision darkened at the edges. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to run. Father Cross noticed immediately. "Easy," he said gently, holding up a hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Liar," the voice snarled, sharp and panicked for the first time. Marlowe's pulse thundered in her ears. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Rowan, who had arrived earlier and now stood pale and rigid near the doorway, rushed forward to steady her. The priest sat across from Marlowe at a careful distance, his posture relaxed, his voice calm. He asked simple questions. Her name. Her age. How long she had been feeling unwell. Marlowe answered haltingly, fighting the urge to snap, to lash out, to say anything that would make him leave. As she spoke, Father Cross watched her closely. Not just her face, but her breathing, the tension in her hands, the way her eyes flicked away whenever he mentioned faith, prayer, or protection. "You didn't invite this fully," he said quietly after a long pause. "But you opened a door. And something walked through it." The reaction was immediate. Marlowe's body seized violently. Her back arched as if pulled by invisible strings, a hoarse sound tearing from her throat. Her mother cried out. Rowan stepped back in horror. Father Cross rose smoothly, authority replacing gentleness without raising his voice. He began to pray. The words hit Marlowe like waves. Her head pounded. Her skin burned, then went icy cold. The presence inside her surged, furious now, no longer hiding behind calm persuasion. Images flooded her mind, chaotic and overwhelming. Darkness closing in. Endless falling. A promise whispered long ago, now demanded in full. She screamed. The sound didn't feel like it came from her. Father Cross continued, steady and relentless, his voice grounding the chaos. He did not shout. He did not rush. Each word carried weight, pressing back against the force tearing through her. Marlowe felt herself splitting. Part of her wanted it to end at any cost. Another part, horrifyingly, wanted to let go. To sink into the quiet power the presence offered. To stop fighting. "Hold on," a smaller voice whispered from somewhere deep inside her. Her own voice. "Please." The pressure peaked. For a moment, she felt something tear loose inside her chest, a sensation like a deep breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. A scream ripped through her, sharp and final, followed by sudden, absolute silence. Her body collapsed forward. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. For several long seconds, no one moved. The room felt unnaturally still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Marlowe opened her eyes. The first thing she noticed was the quiet. No whisper. No pressure. No second heartbeat beneath her own. She inhaled deeply, expecting pain, resistance, something. Instead, her lungs filled easily. Warmth spread through her limbs. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from relief so profound it left her shaking. Father Cross stepped back, exhaustion etched into his features. "It's gone," he said softly. "But you must be careful. Doors like that never truly disappear. They only close." Marlowe nodded weakly, unable to speak. In the days that followed, recovery was slow but real. The nightmares stopped. The lost time never returned. Her thoughts felt like her own again, private and intact. The world settled back into its familiar shape. Rowan apologized again and again, her voice breaking each time. Marlowe forgave her, not because the damage had been small, but because holding on to blame felt like another door she refused to open. Weeks later, Marlowe stood alone on a bridge overlooking the river, watching the water move steadily below. She breathed in the cold air and felt grounded, present in her body in a way she hadn't been for months. She had learned something she would never forget. Not everything that offers relief comes without a cost. Not every voice that sounds kind deserves trust. And some darkness only waits for permission. This time, she would never give it again.